The morning sunlight filtered through the gray, steel-framed windows of Franklin County Jail, illuminating the sterile walls and echoing floors with an unforgiving clarity. Within one of the soundproofed meeting rooms, Michael Clark adjusted his tie, taking a deep breath. The war ahead was not just legal, it was psychological, moral, and painfully personal. Ethan Walker sat across from him, a figure of unnerving calm. His posture was loose, almost languid, as if the world outside the narrow confines of the room had no bearing on him. Yet beneath that ease simmered a quiet, dangerous intelligence, a mind that measured, calculated, and dissected every word Clark spoke. "This is about perception," Clark began, his voice steady but carrying a note of urgency. "We can't change what you did, but we can control how people see you, how the jury sees you. If we present them the wrong narrative, there's no coming back." Ethan let out a short, disinterested laugh, the sound bouncing off the sterile walls. "You mean lie about me? Pretend I'm some sad little kid who doesn't know better?" His eyes glinted with mischief, or was it malice? "Why should I care what some strangers think?" Clark clenched his jaw. He had anticipated resistance, even contempt, but Ethan's level of disregard for everything, including his own future, was staggering. He forced himself to stay calm, to keep his words measured. "Because, Ethan, if you don't care, the consequences will catch you. They will be permanent. Life, maybe more than that, depending on what you do in here." Ethan shrugged, reclining in the chair. "So what? They'll lock me up. Big deal. I'm smarter than all of them anyway. Me doesn't matter. I always win." Clark's stomach tightened. This was no ordinary teenage rebellion. This was arrogance bordering on psychopathy. And it would be his task to mold that arrogance into something, anything, that could buy Ethan even a sliver of mercy in court. The next weeks were spent in meticulous preparation. Clark drilled Ethan on every detail of courtroom behavior: how to dress, how to sit, when to nod, when to lower his eyes. He coached him in the subtleties of projecting sorrow without faltering, in timing a sigh or a subtle shake of the head to convey regret. Every lesson was a careful choreography, a performance designed to mask the void beneath. Yet each session tested Clark's patience. Ethan mocked the gestures, sneered at the instructions, and refused to internalize a single emotion. In his worldview, remorse was weakness, guilt was irrelevant, and any attempt to feign humanity was an insult to his intelligence. The tension between lawyer and client grew with each meeting. Clark felt himself walking a razor's edge, ethically bound to protect a young man who seemed intent on ensuring his own destruction. "I'm not here to beg you to feel something, Ethan," Clark said one afternoon, his voice low, almost defeated. "I'm here to save you from yourself. Understand that. Every smirk, every laugh, every act of defiance you show in that courtroom, it's another brick in the wall that separates you from freedom." Ethan's response was a slow, exaggerated roll of the eyes. "Freedom? Dude, you sound like my mom. I don't need saving." And there it was, the truth Clark had been afraid to confront. This boy, this young man, did not fear consequence, did not value the life he still had, and was entirely convinced that he was untouchable. When pre-trial hearings began, Ethan transformed the courtroom into a stage. During motions to suppress his confession, he doodled on legal pads, smirked at prosecutors, and rolled his eyes at officers' testimony. The local press, sensing the unusual audacity of the defendant, began to label him the smirking teen killer. Before the trial even began, the narrative was forming: arrogant, unrepentant, untouchable. Clark's frustration mounted daily. He tried reasoning with Ethan, appealing to self-interest, warning him of jury perception, describing the harsh reality of life without parole. Each attempt met only with derision. Ethan's narcissism was impenetrable, a fortress against both empathy and caution. Meanwhile, Olivia Rodriguez, the lead prosecutor, watched and waited. Ethan's arrogance was a gift she did not need to manipulate. Every smirk, every dismissive glance, every subtle act of defiance fed the narrative she planned to build, a portrait of a cold, calculating killer beyond rehabilitation. Even Elizabeth Walker, Ethan's mother, found herself powerless. Her attempts to connect, to plead, to cry out for a shred of his compliance were met with icy contempt. She realized with a sinking heart that the child she had nurtured, indulged, and protected was gone, replaced by a presence that was intelligent, manipulative, and terrifyingly empty. The final pretrial hearing was a dress rehearsal for disaster. When the prosecutor detailed the grisly facts of the murder, Ethan's short, audible laugh reverberated through the courtroom like a hammer. Judge Harris slammed his gavel, his expression rigid, warning him that further disruptions would lead to removal. The mask of remorse, if it had ever existed, was obliterated. On the first day of the trial, the courthouse was packed, the chill of a gray autumn morning mirroring the gravity inside. The jury, carefully vetted, took their seats. On one side, the family of the victim, David Campbell, faces etched with lingering grief. On the other, Ethan Walker, in a borrowed suit 2 sizes too big, smirked faintly, detached, ready to observe the proceedings like a spectator in a theater. Opening statements began. Olivia Rodriguez painted a vivid portrait of David Campbell, a teacher, a brother, a man of kindness extinguished by senseless violence. She presented the evidence methodically. The DNA, the murder weapon, the security footage, and the defendant's own chilling confession. Each fact built a damning wall of proof. Then it was Clark's turn. He spoke of a troubled youth, of neglect, psychological turmoil, and a boy overwhelmed by forces beyond his control. His appeal was to the jury's empathy, a desperate attempt to humanize a figure who had made himself monstrous. But Ethan's performance undermined everything. He stifled yawns during Rodriguez's statement, whispered to his lawyer, and grinned faintly when meeting eyes in the gallery. The jury witnessed a chilling contrast. The careful, empathetic narrative of the defense versus the visible, brazen arrogance of the defendant himself. Rodriguez's cross-examinations dismantled Clark's narrative, forcing psychologists and witnesses to admit that difficult childhoods do not excuse acts of brutal murder. Every anecdote meant to elicit sympathy instead highlighted red flags: cruelty, manipulation, detachment, the growing profile of a predator. By the time the defense rested, Clark's carefully constructed narrative had collapsed. The jury was left with 2 starkly contrasting images: the theoretical broken boy and the very real, very present monster. And the monster was sitting before them, smirking. The legal battle was all but lost. But the war for perception, the one fought in the eyes of the jury and the minds of the public, was only beginning. Michael Clark's task was no longer about law. It was about controlling a narrative spun out of his grasp. He had to transform Ethan Walker, the unrepentant killer, into Ethan Walker, the tragic, misguided youth. It was a performance that demanded his client's willing participation. Yet Ethan's willingness was in perpetual question. The coaching sessions took place in the stark, soundproofed rooms of Franklin County Jail. Clark would pace the narrow confines, detailing posture, gaze, expression, even the timing of a sigh or a slow, sorrowful shake of the head. When a victim's family testifies, Clark instructed, you must listen as though every word pierces your heart. Look down, nod slowly, show remorse without words. Ethan reclined in the chair, arms crossed, lips twitching into a faint smirk. Why should I pretend, he said. I didn't do anything wrong in my head. All this remorse stuff? It's weakness. Clark pressed on. He spoke of the jury's psychology, of human empathy, of how an unfeeling glance could undo weeks of preparation. Every smirk, he warned, every laugh, every whisper. It's another brick in the wall that separates you from freedom. Ethan's response was a languid roll of the eyes. Freedom? You sound like my mom. I don't need saving. I'm smarter than all of them. You mean doesn't matter. I always win. Clark's jaw tightened. This was not mere teenage arrogance. It was psychopathy in its embryonic form, and he was tasked with teaching its subtlety and restraint. Pre-trial hearings became a stage for Ethan's audacity. During motions to suppress his confession, he doodled, smirked, and rolled his eyes at officers' testimony. The local press, hungry for spectacle, latched onto the narrative. The smirking teen killer. The courtroom was filled not only with legal minds but with public fascination, drawn by the audacity of a boy who seemed to mock the system itself. Clark's frustration mounted. He tried reason, warnings, appeals to self-interest, but all met the impenetrable wall of Ethan's narcissism. Every argument, every caution, fell like water on stone. Ethan's mind was a fortress, rejecting empathy, consequence, and morality. Olivia Rodriguez, lead prosecutor, observed quietly. Ethan's behavior was a gift she did not need to manufacture. Every smirk, every dismissive glance, every subtle act of defiance was a nail in his own coffin. Her strategy crystallized. Present the cold facts, let the jury witness the arrogance firsthand, and allow the defendant to condemn himself in real time. Even Elizabeth Walker, Ethan's mother, felt powerless. Her desperate attempts to reach him, to plead, to cry out for a shred of compliance, were met with icy contempt. She began to understand that the child she had nurtured, indulged, and protected was gone, replaced by a figure who was intelligent, manipulative, and terrifyingly empty. The first day of the trial was like a storm contained within the courthouse walls. The jury, carefully vetted, took their seats. On one side, David Campbell's grieving family, faces etched with sorrow. On the other, Ethan Walker, dressed in an ill-fitting suit, faintly smirking, detached, surveying the proceedings with the predator's calm. Opening statements commenced. Rodriguez presented a vivid and heartbreaking portrait of David Campbell, teacher, brother, neighbor, whose life had been extinguished for no reason at all. She outlined the evidence: DNA, murder weapon, security footage, Ethan's own confession, methodically, allowing each fact to sink into the jury's consciousness. Then Clark spoke, attempting to humanize a boy who had proven himself unhuman. He described Ethan's troubled upbringing, emotional neglect, and psychological turmoil. He painted a picture of a young man overwhelmed by forces beyond his control, hoping to ignite empathy. But Ethan sabotaged the effort. He stifled yawns during Rodriguez's statements, whispered to his lawyer, and grinned faintly when catching the eyes of onlookers. The jury was witness to a chilling contrast: the defense's empathetic narrative versus the defendant's visible, brazen arrogance. Rodriguez's cross-examinations dismantled Clark's arguments with precision. Psychologists and teachers were forced to concede that difficult childhoods and underdeveloped brains did not excuse brutal murder. Every anecdote intended to elicit sympathy instead highlighted red flags, painting the image of a predator in formation. By the time the defense rested, Clark's narrative had collapsed. The jury faced two stark images: the theoretical broken boy and the real, present monster who smirked at the destruction of his own defense. The next phase was the victim impact statements, a chance to acknowledge that murder was more than an act of violence. It was a permanent fracture of human lives. Amelie Sanchez, David's sister, approached the podium, trembling but resolute. She described her brother not as a case number, but as a man of laughter, kindness, and profound humanity. Her words were precise, sharp, and devastatingly personal. The holidays that would never be the same, traditions broken, silence where his voice should be. Ethan remained impassive. His gaze was clinical, detached, as if observing an abstract display. His mother, Elizabeth, sat in quiet torment, realizing that empathy, pleading, even tears, were meaningless to him. The courtroom seemed to contract around Elizabeth Walker as she rose unexpectedly. Her voice shook, but carried the weight of a lifetime of suppressed horror. "Your Honor, I need to speak." Michael Clark sprang to object, but Judge Harris considered her with a measured pause. He allowed it. Elizabeth's confession dismantled the final threads of the defense. She described not neglect but enabling, not innocence but indulgence, recounting years of excuses for cruelty and the deliberate cultivation of entitlement. "I wanted to believe he would grow out of it," she said, voice cracking. "But my love wasn't love. It was poison. I built him a world with no consequences." Ethan's controlled mask shattered. Rage, fury, and disbelief erupted as he lunged against the deputies, restraining him, screaming at his mother. The jury watched in stunned silence, the image of arrogance replaced by raw, uncontained rage. The trial moved to closing arguments, but the verdict had already been written in the faces, the testimony, and the devastating truths laid bare by a mother who had finally seen the monster she had created. The defense had rested, but the court was far from finished. Michael Clark sat slumped at the table, the weight of the crumbling case pressing down like a physical force. Ethan Walker, meanwhile, was a study in cold detachment, A young man who had spent weeks carefully cultivating a facade of indifference, now poised on the brink of something far darker. Victim impact statements began, and the courtroom shifted from sterile procedure to raw, emotional reckoning. Amelia Sanchez, David Campbell's sister, approached the podium. Trembling, clutching her notes, she spoke of her brother's life, his laughter, his devotion to students, his kindness to friends and neighbors. Her words painted a portrait of a man irreplaceable, a life violently stolen. Ethan watched, expression unreadable, as if observing a distant tableau. No flicker of guilt, no pang of empathy. To him, her grief was an abstraction, a concept as foreign as a foreign language. The jury could see the disconnect, the void where his conscience should have been. Then Elizabeth Walker, Ethan's mother, rose from the gallery. Her face was pale, red-rimmed eyes fixed, her voice trembling but resolute. "Your Honor, I need to speak," she said, and the courtroom fell into stunned silence. Clark's immediate objection was ignored. Judge Harris, recognizing the gravity, allowed her to proceed. Elizabeth approached the stand, hand trembling on the Bible, and began to speak. She did not speak of a broken boy. She spoke of a predator enabled from infancy, trained in subtle cruelty, and shielded from consequence. She recounted the years she had covered for him, excusing violence against animals, bullying of peers, lies to authorities, all under the guise of maternal protection. "I didn't want to see it," she said, voice cracking. "I wanted to believe he would grow out of it. But my love wasn't love. It was poison. I built him a world with no consequences, and I taught him he was entitled to take whatever he wanted because he was special." Her testimony struck like a hammer. The defense's argument of a tragic, troubled child was obliterated in a single, raw confession. The jury's comprehension of Ethan shifted instantly. The boy they had seen sitting smugly, ignoring grief, was not a child crying for help. He was a calculated, cold, unrepentant killer. Ethan's mask finally shattered. His smirk vanished, replaced by a storm of rage and disbelief. "You're lying," he shouted, voice raw, guttural, filled with a fury that seemed almost animalistic. He lunged against the bailiffs, restraining him, thrashing with impotent anger, eyes burning with a fury that had never before been visible. For the first time, he experienced the raw force of a world that would not bend to his whims. The jury sat in stunned silence. The courtroom air was thick with tension, grief, and disbelief. Michael Clark could only bury his face in his hands, knowing the trial had been undone from within, by the very person he had trusted most. Closing arguments followed, but the outcome had been determined. Olivia Rodriguez spoke with brevity and precision, reminding the jury of Elizabeth Walker's testimony and the inexorable chain of evidence. "His own mother showed you the monster," she said. "It is now your duty to hold that monster accountable." Clark's subdued plea for empathy now rang hollow, even to his own ears. Deliberation took less than an hour. The verdict was read aloud with clarity and finality. Guilty of aggravated murder. A wave of quiet relief washed over the Campbell family, while Ethan, now clad in the orange jumpsuit of the condemned, remained eerily still. His arrogance had dissipated, replaced by a hollow, uncomprehending panic. 2 weeks later, the courtroom reconvened for sentencing. Judge James Harris, a man known for fairness tempered with an unflinching sense of justice, addressed Ethan directly. He recounted the crime, the devastating human cost, and the arrogance with which the defendant had treated the legal process. "Your mother created a world with no consequences," the judge said, eyes piercing. "Today, Mr. Walker, that world ends." Ethan's fate was sealed. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The words echoed through the chamber, final and irrevocable. The armor of arrogance dissolved instantly. His eyes went wide, face slack, a terror foreign and raw washing over him. The first genuine sound he made, a strangled choke sob, was not for David Campbell, but for himself, for the loss of a world he had never known could hold him accountable. Bailiffs moved to lead him away. His struggles were weak, desperate, futile. He searched for an escape that did not exist, the terror of real consequence finally sinking in. His mother watched in stone-faced sorrow, mourning not only the son she had known, but the one she had inadvertently helped create. As the heavy courtroom doors closed, the echo of a monster's laughter was replaced by silence. For the first time, Ethan Walker understood the meaning of defeat, the irrevocable reality of justice, and the emptiness within himself. The trial, long a theater of arrogance and denial, had ended not with rhetoric or argument, but with truth, exposure, and the inescapable finality of consequence.